Hey there, truth seekers and reality questioners. Buckle up, because today we're about to take a deep dive into the rabbit hole that makes Alice's adventure look like a casual stroll through the park. We're talking about the big one, the conspiracy theory of everything. The matrix of control, ancient wisdom that sounds suspiciously like modern physics, and the uncomfortable question of whether the reality you're experiencing right now is actually, well, real. Yeah, I know, sounds like someone watched The Matrix one too many times after a philosophy degree. But here's the thing. What if the ancients knew something we forgot? And what if modern science is just now catching up? Before we start questioning the fabric of existence itself, do me a favour. Smash that like button if you're ready to have your worldview gently, or not so gently, rattled. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching this from. Are you in New York? Tokyo? Some small town that definitely feels like a simulation sometimes? I genuinely want to know who's brave enough to join me on this journey into the absolute weirdest corners of human consciousness and conspiracy culture. Look, I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm not your guru, and I definitely don't have all the answers. Nobody does, and anyone who says they do is probably selling something. What I am offering is a trip through some of the most mind-bending ideas about reality, power, and the nature of existence itself. Ancient Gnostic texts meeting quantum physics. Secret societies meeting science fiction. The stuff that makes you go, "That's crazy," and then keeps you up at night thinking, "But what if?" Ready to question everything? Let's go. So let's talk about the reality you're experiencing right now. You know, the one where you're watching this video on a device that knows more about your preferences than you do, in a world where your newsfeed is uniquely tailored just for you, which sounds convenient until you realize that your neighbor is seeing a completely different version of what's supposedly objective reality. Welcome to the information age, where personalized reality isn't just a philosophical concept, it's a business model. And frankly, we're all guinea pigs in the biggest psychological experiment in human history, except nobody signed a consent form, and the lab rats are paying for the privilege through subscription fees. Think about it for a second. Your social media algorithm, let's call it what it really is, your digital reality curator, has been watching you. Not in a creepy stalker way, though actually yes, exactly in a creepy stalker way. It knows you lingered 3 seconds longer on that cat video. It noticed you scrolled past political content from one side but engaged with the other. It saw you watch that conspiracy theory video at 2 a.m. when you couldn't sleep, probably while eating cereal straight from the box like an adult who has their life together. Based on these digital breadcrumbs, it starts feeding you more of what you want, or more accurately, what keeps you scrolling. Before you know it, you're living in a bubble where everyone agrees with you, all the news confirms your worldview, and anyone who thinks differently is clearly brainwashed by their algorithm. The irony would be hilarious if it wasn't so terrifying. This isn't some distant dystopian future. This is Tuesday. Right now, someone across town is seeing completely different trending topics than you. Their reality, shaped by the same platform, is fundamentally different from yours. They might think a completely different set of issues is important, believe a completely different version of current events, and be absolutely convinced that they're the ones seeing the truth while you're the one in the bubble. Both of you are partially right and mostly trapped. It's like living in parallel dimensions, except instead of a cool sci-fi portal, the gateway is a blue app icon you tap approximately 96 times a day. Not that anyone's counting. Now here's where things get properly weird. This modern phenomenon of personalized realities isn't actually new. We just upgraded the technology. Ancient wisdom traditions, particularly Gnosticism, talked about this exact problem 2,000 years ago, except they called it something different. They had this concept called the demiurge, not a character from a fantasy novel, though it sounds like one. According to Gnostic texts, the demiurge was basically a false god, a cosmic architect who created the physical world as a sort of prison for human souls. Think of it as the original Matrix, except instead of machines harvesting humans for batteries, which by the way makes zero thermodynamic sense, but we love the movie anyway, you had a deluded deity trapping consciousness in meat suits and convincing everyone this was all there is. The Gnostics believed that the material world, everything you can see and touch and unfortunately stub your toe on at 3 a.m., was a pale imitation of a higher reality. The demiurge, in their cosmology, wasn't evil exactly, more like incompetent and egotistical, which honestly tracks with a lot of creation myths when you think about it. This entity created the physical universe and then convinced itself and everyone living in it that this was the ultimate reality. That matter was all that mattered, pun absolutely intended. Humans, according to this view, were divine sparks trapped in physical bodies, stumbling through life completely unaware that they were essentially immortal beings, doing a really convincing cosplay as limited, mortal creatures who worry about mortgage payments and whether they left the stove on. Now you might be thinking this sounds like ancient mystical nonsense, the kind of thing people came up with before we had science and rational thinking and the ability to Google things. And sure, the Gnostics were writing this stuff in the 2nd century without the benefit of peer review or scientific method, possibly while wearing robes that were definitely less comfortable than modern clothing. But here's the thing that'll make you uncomfortable. Modern physics is starting to sound suspiciously similar to these ancient mystical traditions, except with more math and less incense. Enter quantum physics, stage left, wearing a lab coat and carrying equations that make your high school algebra look like counting on fingers. Quantum physicists, the people who supposedly have reality figured out because they can split atoms and measure impossible things, have proposed something called the holographic principle. This isn't about those shiny stickers you had on your notebooks in the 90s. The holographic principle suggests that our 3-dimensional reality might actually be a projection from information encoded on a 2-dimensional surface, like a cosmic movie screen. Everything you experience, your coffee, your cat, your existential dread at 2 a.m., might be essentially a very convincing hologram projected from a more fundamental level of reality we can't directly access. Let that sink in for a moment. Scientists, actual scientists with credentials and published papers and everything, are seriously proposing that reality as we know it might be a projection. Not a metaphor, not a philosophical thought experiment, but an actual possible description of how the universe works. It's like the Gnostics were onto something with their material world is an illusion bit, except now we have mathematical equations supporting the concept, and it's suddenly respectable to talk about at academic conferences instead of just in incense-filled rooms with mystically inclined people wearing questionable fashion choices. But wait, it gets weirder, because apparently the universe saw quantum physics and thought, hold my beer. Enter simulation theory, which is exactly what it sounds like and somehow more disturbing when you think about the implications. Philosophers and scientists, and yes, these are serious academics, not just that guy who got too deep into Reddit threads, have started taking seriously the idea that we might be living in a computer simulation created by a more advanced civilization. The basic argument goes like this. If it's possible to create realistic simulations of consciousness, and if civilizations tend to create many such simulations, then statistically speaking, there are way more simulated realities than base reality. Which means you're probably in a simulation right now. Sweet dreams, by the way. Nick Bostrom, a philosopher at Oxford who definitely has more letters after his name than most of us, laid out this argument in a paper that made everyone deeply uncomfortable at parties. He basically said that one of 3 things must be true. Either civilizations never get advanced enough to create realistic simulations, or they get advanced but choose not to create them for some reason, or we're almost certainly living in a simulation. Those are your options, and none of them are particularly comforting. It's like being asked whether you'd rather know your life is fake, know humanity is doomed, or know that advanced civilizations uniformly decide simulating consciousness is a bad idea, which raises its own concerning questions about what they know. That we don't. Even Elon Musk, a man who spends his days launching rockets and his nights posting memes that confuse shareholders, has gone on record saying he thinks there's only a 1 in billions chance we're living in base reality. Let me repeat that. A guy who actually builds spaceships and electric cars thinks there's a 99.9999% chance that reality is basically a very elaborate video game, and he's still building spaceships anyway, which is either admirable dedication or the ultimate might-as-well attitude toward existence. Now, if you're feeling a bit existentially queasy right now, that's normal. The idea that reality might be fundamentally different from what we perceive it to be is disturbing on multiple levels. It's like finding out your entire life was a Truman Show situation, except instead of Jim Carrey discovering cameras in his bathroom mirror, it's the fabric of space-time itself that might be the illusion. Not exactly the kind of revelation that makes you feel stable and grounded, which is unfortunately not a feeling you can order on Amazon Prime, though they're probably working on it. But here's where things go from theoretically weird to, okay, now I need to watch this video 5 times, weird. There are these things called reality glitches, moments captured on video where reality seems to malfunction. Birds frozen in mid-air, hovering impossibly while everything else moves normally. People appearing to levitate for just a moment before physics remembers it's supposed to be working. Objects disappearing and reappearing in footage with no explanation. Double images of people in the background of photos like a cosmic copy-paste error. Now, before you start filming everything hoping to catch a glitch, let's be clear. Most of these have perfectly reasonable explanations. Camera artifacts, editing tricks, optical illusions, that weird thing that happens when you blink and your brain fills in the gap wrong. But, and this is a big but, not all of them do. Some of these glitches have stumped video analysts and professional skeptics. Some show things that shouldn't be possible according to our understanding of physics, captured by multiple cameras from different angles. Are they proof we're living in a simulation? No, that's not how proof works, much to the disappointment of everyone looking for easy answers to cosmic questions. But are they weird enough to make you wonder? Absolutely. There's this video that circulated a few years back showing a bird completely frozen in midair on a highway. Cars are driving past it, the camera is moving, everything else is in motion, but this bird is just paused. Like someone hit the spacebar on reality and forgot to unpause that particular object. Traffic is flowing around it, drivers are presumably having the weirdest commute of their lives, and the bird is doing its best statue impression without the benefit of actually being a statue. Explanations range from obviously fake to camera shutter timing to, welp, we're definitely in a simulation and someone's computer just lagged. The fact that we can't definitively prove which explanation is correct tells you something about how weird reality can get when you're actually paying attention. Or consider the phenomenon of the Mandela effect, where large groups of people remember things differently from how they actually are or were. Named after the widespread false memory that Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s. Spoiler alert, he didn't. He became president of South Africa and died in 2013. This effect has people remembering everything from children's book titles to movie. Lines differently from documented reality. Was it Berenstain Bears or Berenstain Bears? Does Darth Vader say, "Luke, I am your father," or "No, I am your father"? Thousands of people will swear they remember one version, while the evidence clearly shows another. Skeptics will tell you this is just how human memory works. It's notoriously unreliable. It fills in gaps. It's influenced by suggestion and cultural contamination. And they're probably right, because human memory is indeed about as reliable as a chocolate teapot in terms of factual accuracy. But simulation theorists point out that shared false memories affecting large groups could also be evidence of reality being edited or merged timelines, like someone went back and changed the source code, and most people's memories updated, but some held on to the old version. It's like a cosmic software update where some users are still running the old OS and getting confused when everyone else's interface looks different. The thing is, whether you believe in the Gnostic demiurge, the holographic universe, simulation theory, or reality glitches, there's a common thread running through all of these ideas. What you perceive as solid, objective reality might be far more fluid and subjective than you've been led to believe. The ancient mystics said it, quantum physicists are saying it, programmers looking at the universe's underlying mathematics are saying it, and your algorithm-curated social media feed is proving it every single day by showing you a completely different world than it shows the person sitting next to you. So what does this mean for you personally right now, watching this video in whatever reality you currently inhabit? It means that certainty is a luxury we probably never had in the first place. It means that the guy absolutely convinced he's right about everything might be living in a completely different information bubble, or a completely different simulation, or under the influence of a completely different demiurge-created illusion. It means that the fabric of reality might be far stranger than we ever imagined, and also far less stable than we'd prefer it to be when we're trying to pay bills and maintain relationships and generally function as normal humans. The question isn't really whether these theories are true. Most of us don't have access to the kind of evidence that would definitively prove or disprove them, and honestly, if we did, we probably wouldn't trust it anyway, because how do you trust evidence from within a potentially illusory reality? The question is what you do with the possibility that reality might not be what you think it is. Do you dismiss it all as nonsense and go back to your comfortable assumptions? Do you dive deep into research and emerge 3 months later with a wall covered in red string and photos connected by lines? Do you just shrug and keep living your life because ultimately you still need to eat and sleep and function, regardless of what metaphysical reality you're operating in? Here's my suggestion, for whatever it's worth from someone making videos about conspiracy theories and ancient wisdom on the internet. Stay curious, but stay grounded. Question your reality, but don't forget to participate in it. Recognize that your perception is probably limited and possibly manipulated, but use that knowledge to be more thoughtful about what you accept as truth, not to descend into paranoid nihilism where nothing means anything. The Gnostics believed that awareness of the illusion was the first step toward liberation from it. Modern psychology tells us that understanding our cognitive biases makes us slightly less susceptible to them, though not as much as we'd like because humans are wonderfully stubborn creatures. Whether we're dealing with algorithmic reality bubbles, holographic projections, simulation overlords, or cosmic demiurges playing with their creation like a kid with an anthill, or just living in a perfectly normal physical universe that happens to be really weird when you look at it closely enough, the practical result is the same. Your experience of reality is unique, limited, and probably somewhat illusory. The person you're arguing with online sees a different world than you do, literally or figuratively or both. And the nature of existence itself might be far stranger and more fluid than we ever imagined, which is simultaneously terrifying and kind of exciting if you're into that sort of thing. The demiurge, whether you think of it as an ancient entity, a cosmic programmer, a quantum projection system, or just a really good metaphor for the limits of human perception, is supposedly kept in power by our ignorance of its existence. The moment you start questioning the nature of reality itself, you've already taken the first step toward whatever liberation looks like in this context. You might be a divine spark trapped in matter, a consciousness experiencing a holographic projection, a simulated being in an alien computer, or just a regular human trying to make sense of a genuinely confusing universe. But at least now you're a questioning one, which is probably the most human thing you can be, simulated or otherwise. And on that cheerful note of existential uncertainty, let's dive deeper into who or what might be running this show, assuming there is a show, and we're not all just spontaneously existing for no particular reason, which is somehow even more unsettling when you think about it. Because if reality is potentially an illusion, or simulation, or holographic projection, the next logical question is, who's in charge of this thing, and what exactly are they doing with all this power? Spoiler alert, the answers proposed by conspiracy theorists are somehow even wilder than you're probably living in a computer simulation, which I didn't think was possible until I started researching this topic. But that's a story for the next chapter. For now, sit with this discomfort, question your assumptions, and maybe look at your social media feed with a bit more skepticism about whose reality it's really showing you. See you on the other side of the rabbit hole. Alright, so we've established that reality might be an illusion, a simulation, or at minimum way weirder than your high school physics teacher led you to believe. Cool. Now let's talk about who's running this circus, because if there's one thing conspiracy theories agree on, it's that someone is definitely pulling the strings, and it's probably not the people you see on the evening news looking concerned while reading from teleprompters. Welcome to the power pyramid, where democracy is the gift shop at the entrance, and the real museum is about 17 floors underground, in a section that's definitely not on the public tour. Let's start at the surface level, where things are nice and comfortable and make you feel like you have some control over your life. You've got your democratically elected governments, your voting booths, your voice matters, campaigns that show up every few years asking you to choose between candidates who went to the same universities, belong to the same clubs, and somehow always end up implementing similar policies regardless of which party wins. It's like picking between Coke and Pepsi when both are made by corporations that definitely don't care if you're thirsty, they just care that you keep buying beverages. Democracy gives you the illusion of power, which is honestly the perfect kind of control system because people who think they're free don't usually rebel against their chains, especially if the chains come with streaming services and next day delivery. Don't get me wrong, voting and civic participation are important, and democracy beats most alternatives like choosing between a root canal and listening to someone explain cryptocurrency at a party. But if you think the elected officials are actually the ones making the big decisions, well, I have a bridge to sell you, and coincidentally the financing for that bridge is controlled by the next layer down in our pyramid. The politicians you see giving speeches and kissing babies are more like middle management in a corporate structure, where nobody really knows who the CEO is, and the CEO prefers it that way because accountability is so last century. Dig one layer deeper, and you hit the corporations and financial institutions, the folks who actually move the pieces on the board, while the politicians explain to you why the game has to be played this way and definitely can't be changed. How dare you suggest otherwise? These are your major corporations, your banking cartels, your investment firms managing trillions of dollars that could solve world hunger, but are instead allocated toward making sure the number goes up, which is apparently the only moral imperative that matters in modern capitalism. When a bank becomes too big to fail, what that really means is that it's achieved a hostage situation where the entire economy will collapse if it doesn't get what it wants, which is a protection racket with better PR and nicer offices. Think about it. When was the last time your elected representative made a major policy decision that genuinely hurt corporate profits? I'll wait. Actually, don't wait, because we'd be here until the heat death of the universe. Corporate lobbying, which is just bribery with extra steps and better lawyers, ensures that the laws get written by the people who benefit from them, then handed to politicians who present them as if they came up with these ideas themselves while representing the interests of regular folks. It's like if you let the fox not only guard the henhouse but also write the safety regulations for henhouses, and then everyone acts surprised when chickens keep disappearing and the fox keeps getting fatter. The revolving door between government and industry is so well established that it's basically a theme park ride at this point. Regulate an industry, retire from government, get hired by that industry for 10 times your government salary. Or work for a corporation, move into government to oversee that industry, write favourable regulations, move back to the corporation with a nice promotion. It's the circle of life, except instead of lions and gazelles, it's politicians and lobbyists. And instead of sustaining an ecosystem, it's sustaining a system where wealth flows consistently upward, while everyone else gets motivational posters about working harder. But wait, we're not done descending this pyramid, because if you think corporations are calling all the shots, you're still playing in the kiddie pool of conspiracy theories. Go deeper, and you hit the secret societies, the intelligence agencies, the shadowy groups that definitely don't exist, except for all the times they do exist, and we find out about them decades later through declassified documents. The deep state, as it's called, which sounds like a poorly named indie band but actually refers to the permanent government infrastructure that continues regardless of which temporary politicians happen to be in office at any given moment. Now, intelligence agencies are real and documented. The CIA exists. MI6 exists. Mossad exists. They do actual spy stuff, some of which is presumably necessary for national security, and some of which is absolutely wild when you read about it years later and wonder how that seemed like a good idea to anyone involved. Project MKUltra was real. The CIA literally experimented on unwitting American citizens with LSD and mind control techniques, which we know because they admitted it after destroying most of the evidence. If that doesn't make you slightly suspicious about what they're currently doing that they haven't admitted to yet, you have more faith in institutional transparency than the historical record warrants. The thing about intelligence agencies is that they operate in secret by definition. Their entire job is doing things without public knowledge or oversight, which creates a perfect environment for mission creep, abuse of power, and activities that would make the voting public extremely uncomfortable if they knew the details. When you combine that with the fact that these agencies have virtually unlimited budgets, access to surveillance technology that would make Orwell weep, and the legal authority to classify anything embarrassing as a matter of national security, you've got a recipe for exactly the kind of shadow government that conspiracy theorists keep talking about. The deep state theory suggests there's a permanent government of unelected officials, intelligence operatives, and bureaucrats who actually run things regardless of which party controls the White House or Congress. Politicians come and go, but the infrastructure remains, along with its priorities, connections, and institutional memory. It's like how your company might get a new CEO who promises to change everything, but somehow the actual day-to-day operations barely shift because middle management has been there for 20 years and knows how things really work. Except in this case, middle management has access to classified information, surveillance networks, and the ability to make people disappear, not just into different departments, but into black sites that definitely don't appear on Google Maps. Then you've got your secret societies, the Freemasons, Skull and Bones, the Bilderberg Group, and whatever other organizations rich and powerful people join to network with other rich and powerful people while wearing robes or not wearing robes, depending on the particular society's dress code. Some of these are documented and real. The Bilderberg meetings actually happen. Powerful politicians, business leaders, and intellectuals really do gather in secret to discuss global affairs without press access or public minutes. The Bohemian Grove gathering is real. There really is an elite men's club that meets annually in the California redwoods for networking and weird theatrical rituals involving a giant owl statue, which is either harmless tradition or deeply symbolic, depending on how much you've researched occult symbolism and how much coffee you've had. Do these societies control the world? Probably not in the direct cartoon villain way that some theories suggest. But do they represent a network of powerful people who coordinate with each other, share information and resources, and collectively have enormous influence over global events? Yeah, that's kind of the point of networking groups. When you get the heads of major corporations, political leaders, and influential thinkers in a room together repeatedly over years, they're going to develop relationships, shared interests, and coordinated approaches to problems, which from the outside looks an awful lot like conspiracy, even if from the inside it feels like collegial cooperation among peers. Now here's where we get to the really spicy part of the pyramid, the bit at the very top where conspiracy theories diverge into different flavors of wild. Who's actually at the apex of this control structure? Is it just regular human elites, the billionaires and power brokers who've accumulated so much wealth and influence that they effectively operate as a ruling class? That's honestly the most boring answer, which doesn't mean it's wrong. Maybe the conspiracy is just capitalism working exactly as designed, concentrating power and wealth in fewer and fewer hands until you've got a small group of individuals who collectively have more influence over global events than most governments. Occam's razor would suggest this is the answer. No need to invoke anything supernatural when good old-fashioned greed and power accumulation explain the pattern perfectly well. But conspiracy theories don't stop at the boring answer, because where's the fun in that? Some theories propose that the real controllers aren't entirely human, or at least aren't operating with human interests in mind. We'll get into reptilian theories more later, but the basic idea is that certain bloodlines might be influenced or controlled by non-human entities, either through genetic manipulation, possession, or shape-shifting, depending on which particular version of the theory you're examining. Then you've got theories about extraterrestrial influence, suggesting that various alien species have been guiding or manipulating human development for their own purposes, which at least would explain why our civilization seems to make such consistently terrible decisions. Maybe we're being advised by beings who don't actually care if we thrive or survive. And at the really esoteric end of the spectrum, you've got the idea that what's really at the top isn't physical at all, but rather the demiurge we talked about earlier, or what some traditions call archons, non-physical entities that feed on human emotional energy, particularly lower vibration emotions like fear, anger, and despair. In this view, the entire control pyramid exists to keep humanity trapped in a state of suffering and limitation, because that's what generates the energy these entities consume. All the wars, the economic crashes, the manufactured crises, they're not bugs in the system, they're features, designed to keep the fear flowing like a cosmic battery farm where humans are the batteries and negative emotions are the current. Which brings us quite nicely to how this control system actually operates on a day-to-day basis, because whether the controllers are human elites, reptilian overlords, alien observers, or energy-feeding entities, they all seem to use the same basic toolkit. And the primary tool in that kit is fear, which has been keeping populations compliant since before we had written language to record just how scared we were of the thing in the dark that wanted to eat us. Fear is the ultimate control mechanism, and it's been refined over centuries into an absolute art form. Think about how religion was used historically, not spirituality itself, which can be genuinely beneficial for people, but organized religion as a control structure. Believe the right things, follow the rules, don't question authority, or you'll burn in hell for eternity. That's pretty effective motivation, honestly. Can't really verify the threat until after you're dead, at which point it's too late to file a complaint, and in the meantime you've been a compliant member of society who doesn't cause problems for the power structure. The apocalypse was always just around the corner. Repent now or face eternal damnation when Judgment Day comes, which is definitely soon. We're very serious this time, not like all those other dates we predicted that didn't pan out. That pattern of imminent apocalypse has continued into the modern era, just with different flavors. Instead of religious end times, we get terrorist threats, pandemics, economic collapse, climate catastrophe, Nuclear war, artificial intelligence uprising, there's always something to be terrified about, and conveniently, being terrified makes you more willing to surrender freedoms, accept restrictions, and trust authority figures who promise they're the only ones who can protect you from the scary thing. Not that all these threats are fake, some are very real, but the way they're presented and utilized by power structures is absolutely about maintaining control through fear. Let's talk about how modern media creates and sustains fear, because it's genuinely impressive in a horrifying sort of way. The 24-hour news cycle means there's always something to be afraid of, constantly updated, always urgent, perpetually breaking. You can't just check the news once a day anymore because the news is happening all the time, which really means anxiety is being generated all the time. Something exploded somewhere. Someone important said something alarming. The economy is doing something that experts are concerned about. There's a new study suggesting the thing you eat regularly is killing you. Terrorism, pandemic, political crisis, environmental disaster, flip through the channels and it's fear in every flavour, a buffet of anxiety where the only thing on the menu is reasons to be worried. And here's the brilliant part. Just when you're getting numb to one crisis, they switch to another. Terrorism fatigue setting in, time for a pandemic getting old, here's some political upheaval, people starting to tune out politics. Environmental catastrophe back on the front page. It's like a rotating schedule of disasters, each one getting its moment in the spotlight before being cycled out for the next thing, which keeps the fear fresh and your attention fragmented. You never get a chance to actually solve any problem because before you've even processed one crisis, you're being told to worry about something else entirely. This constant state of anxiety serves multiple purposes for those in power. First, scared people don't think critically. They react. When you're in fight or flight mode, the part of your brain that does complex reasoning takes a back seat to the part that responds to immediate threats. Perfect for getting populations to accept policies they'd normally question if they had time to think it through. Second, if you're worried about terrorism or disease or economic collapse, you're not paying attention to what the government or corporations are actually doing with their power. It's distraction dressed up as information. Third, fear keeps you consuming news, products that promise safety, services that promise security, anything that makes you feel slightly less vulnerable to whatever they told you to be afraid of this week. The events of September 11th, 2001 represent a watershed moment in the industrialization of fear, at least in the Western world. Now, before we go further, let me be clear. Real people died in a genuine tragedy, and that suffering deserves respect. But what happened after, the response to that tragedy, that's where things get interesting from a conspiracy perspective. Within weeks, the entire security infrastructure of the United States was being rebuilt around the assumption of constant threat. The Patriot Act passed with minimal debate, giving government agencies surveillance powers that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Airport security became an ordeal designed to remind you at every step that you should be afraid. Take off your shoes, remove your belt, no liquids over 3 ounces, full body scanners, random searches, all of it a theatrical performance of security that's more about conditioning compliance than actually preventing attacks, as security experts have. Repeatedly demonstrated by sneaking prohibited items through screenings during tests. Wars were launched, not in Afghanistan where the attackers were allegedly based, but in Iraq, a country that had nothing to do with the attacks but conveniently had oil and a government that wasn't cooperating with American interests. The war on terror became a blank check for military intervention anywhere, anytime, against anyone defined as a terrorist, which turned out to be a remarkably flexible category. Billions, then trillions of dollars flowed into defense contractors, surveillance technology companies, and military operations, creating entire industries that profit from perpetual fear and conflict. When war becomes this profitable, suddenly peace becomes a threat to quarterly earnings, which creates some very perverse incentives for the people making policy decisions who will later get jobs at the companies that benefited from those decisions. The surveillance state that emerged post-2001 is something that would have seemed dystopian if you'd described it to someone in 1999, but it was implemented piece by piece, each expansion justified by the need for security against an ever-present terrorist threat. The NSA collecting metadata on every phone call made by Americans, revealed by Edward Snowden, who had to flee the country to avoid prosecution for telling people what their government was doing to them. Social media companies working with intelligence agencies to monitor communications, facial recognition cameras in public spaces, license plate readers tracking vehicle movements. The slow normalization of constant surveillance sold as the price of safety, until suddenly you live in a society where privacy is considered suspicious, and wanting to keep anything private means you must have something to hide. And the pattern continues with each new crisis. Pandemic hits, and suddenly you've got contact tracing apps, vaccine passports, restrictions on movement and assembly, all justified by public health concerns. Some of it might be genuinely necessary. Epidemics are real, and disease control requires coordination. But once you establish that the government can restrict your movements, close businesses, enforce medical compliance, and monitor your health status during an emergency, you've set a precedent. You've established that certain rights aren't really rights but privileges that can be suspended when authorities declare an emergency. And who decides what constitutes an emergency? The authorities. See how that works? Climate change gets used the same way. It's a real phenomenon with real consequences, but it's also being used to justify massive expansions of government power, carbon credit systems that amount to another financial market for the already wealthy to profit from, and restrictions on individual behavior, while the corporations actually responsible for the majority of emissions continue business as usual. The fear is real, the threat is real, but the solutions being offered tend to consolidate power upward rather than actually solving the problem, which should make you at least a little suspicious about whose interests are really being served. The thing about fear-based control is that it's self-reinforcing. Once you've accepted surveillance and restrictions for one emergency, it's easier to accept them for the next one. Once you've agreed that security is more important than privacy, you've conceded the philosophical ground needed to justify basically any intrusion. Once you've bought into the idea that you need authorities to protect you from threats you can't handle yourself, you've become dependent on those authorities, which gives them enormous power over your life. And if they happen to exaggerate threats, manufacture crises, or allow problems to develop that they could have prevented, well, you'll never know because the information is classified, and questioning the narrative makes you a conspiracy theorist, which we've all been conditioned to hear as crazy person who shouldn't be listened to. So whether you're at the top of the pyramid or somewhere in the middle layers, the playbook is the same. Keep people afraid, keep them distracted, keep them believing they need you to protect them, and they'll accept almost anything. They'll surrender freedoms their ancestors died for. They'll support wars that don't benefit them. They'll accept surveillance that treats everyone like a suspect. They'll comply with restrictions that limit their movement, their speech, their ability to gather and organize, all in the name of safety from whatever the current designated threat happens to be. And if you're sitting there thinking, but some of these threats are real, you're right. That's what makes the system so effective. Mix real dangers with exaggerated ones, present everything with the same level of urgency, and nobody can tell the difference anymore. It's the boy who cried wolf, except the boy works for the government, owns a media empire, and has a financial interest in keeping you worried about wolves, even when there aren't any nearby. Some days there are wolves, some days there aren't. But you're being told to be afraid every day regardless, and that's the point. The architecture of control and the industry of fear work together beautifully, each supporting the other. The power pyramid needs scared populations to maintain control. The fear industry needs powerful entities to amplify and exploit crises. Together they create a system where you're perpetually anxious, largely powerless, and increasingly willing to accept that this is just how things are and how they'll always be. The Matrix doesn't need to be a literal computer simulation when you've built a psychological one that's just as effective at keeping people compliant and contained. But recognizing the system is the first step to not being completely controlled by it. Question the fear being sold to you. Ask who benefits from your anxiety. Wonder why the solutions to crises always seem to involve more power for those already in power and less freedom for everyone else. And maybe, just maybe, stop watching quite so much news and see if the world feels different when you're not being fed a constant diet of things to be terrified about. The pyramid is real, the fear is manufactured, and you're more powerful than they need you to believe you are. Remember that. Now, shall we talk about what else they might be putting in your food and water to keep you compliant? Because if psychological control isn't enough, there's always chemical warfare disguised as public health policy. But that's our next stop down this particular rabbit hole. Speaking of things being put in your body without your full informed consent, Let's talk about the chemical dimension of control, because apparently psychological manipulation and fear-based compliance aren't enough. If you really want to keep a population docile, you need to work on the hardware, not just the software. Enter fluoride, processed foods, pharmaceuticals, and a whole cocktail of substances that conspiracy theorists claim are designed to keep you sick, stupid, and compliant. Whether you think this is genuine health policy or a slow-motion chemical warfare operation probably depends on how much you trust institutions that have historically lied to you about other things, which is a fun calculation to make while drinking. Tap water. Let's start with fluoride, the elephant in the water supply. Fluoride gets added to public water in many countries, officially to prevent tooth decay, which sounds nice and helpful until you start digging into the history and the science gets a bit murky. The conspiracy theory version goes like this. Fluoride calcifies the pineal gland, a small endocrine organ in your brain that ancient spiritual traditions called the third eye and believed was your connection to higher consciousness. By calcifying this gland with fluoride, you're essentially closing off humanity's ability to access expanded states of awareness, making people more materialistic, less spiritual, and easier to control. It's like putting a lock on the door to enlightenment and throwing away the key, except the key is in the water you drink every day, and you can't really avoid it unless you buy a fancy filtration system, which conveniently costs money most people don't have. Now, does fluoride actually calcify the pineal gland? Studies have shown that the pineal gland does accumulate fluoride more than any other soft tissue in the body, and heavily fluoridated pineal glands do show calcification. Whether this affects consciousness, spiritual awareness, or your ability to perceive reality beyond the material is harder to prove scientifically, because how exactly do you measure someone's connection to higher dimensions in a lab setting? You can't really publish a peer-reviewed study titled "Fluoride Makes You Less Psychic, a Double-Blind Trial," though honestly that would get tremendous clicks. The scientific establishment will tell you the benefits of fluoride for dental health outweigh any concerns. Conspiracy theorists will tell you that's exactly what they'd say if they were trying to keep you spiritually stunted and physically compliant. The thing is, fluoride wasn't originally added to water for your teeth. The first large-scale use of fluoride was actually in aluminum production and the fertilizer industry, which created massive amounts of fluoride waste that companies needed to dispose of. Somewhere along the way, instead of this being a toxic waste problem, it became a dental health solution, which is either the greatest recycling success story of all time or the most profitable disposal method ever invented, depending on your perspective. When you can't afford to dispose of toxic waste properly, just call it a health supplement and convince cities to add it to the water supply. It's brilliant in a deeply cynical sort of way. Then you've got GMOs, genetically modified organisms, which sounds futuristic and scientific until you realize we're basically letting corporations patent seeds, control food supply, and modify the genetic structure of what we eat without long-term studies on what that does to human health across generations. The official line is that GMOs are safe, increase crop yields, reduce pesticide use, and help feed the world. The conspiracy angle is that GMOs are designed to create dependency. Farmers can't save seeds anymore because they're patented. Crops are engineered to work with specific pesticides that the same companies sell, and the modifications might be having effects on human health that we won't understand for decades because you can't really do a 50-year double-blind study on whether eating modified corn gives you weird health problems when everyone's already eating the modified corn. And speaking of pesticides, let's talk about all the chemicals being sprayed on the food you eat every day. Glyphosate, the active ingredient in many herbicides, has been classified as a probable carcinogen by some international agencies while still being approved for widespread use in agriculture. You're eating it on your vegetables, drinking it in your water as runoff, breathing it if you live near farms, and somehow this is considered acceptable risk in the name of agricultural efficiency. When the chemical companies that make these pesticides are the same ones doing the safety studies and lobbying the regulatory agencies, you start to see how this might not be the most unbiased system for protecting public health. It's like letting the fox not only guard the henhouse, but also write the safety regulations for henhouses and investigate itself when chickens go missing. Processed food is its own special category of chemical warfare disguised as convenience. Walk down any grocery store aisle and count how many ingredients you can actually pronounce in the average packaged product. Red dye 40, sodium benzoate, partially hydrogenated oils, high fructose corn syrup, monosodium glutamate. It's a chemistry experiment, not food, but it's cheap, it's convenient, and it's engineered to be addictive. Sugar, salt, and fat in specific ratios literally light up the same reward centers in your brain as cocaine, which the food companies know because they employ scientists specifically to find the bliss point that keeps you coming back for more. It's not conspiracy theory, it's documented business practice. They're engineering food to be as addictive as possible, while keeping it just barely legal and calling it innovation. The conspiracy version extends this to intentional dumbing down and energy lowering. The theory goes that processed food, loaded with chemicals and stripped of nutrients, lowers your vibrational frequency, makes you more dense, more materialistic, less capable of accessing higher states of consciousness. Every time you eat a microwave dinner full of preservatives and artificial flavors, you're supposedly lowering your energetic vibration, making it harder to wake up to the true nature of reality. Whether you buy into the vibrational frequency stuff or not, there's no denying that processed food makes people sick. Obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, all skyrocketing in populations that switch to Western diets heavy in processed foods. Maybe it's not about vibrations, maybe it's just regular old toxic accumulation and nutrient deficiency, but either way, you're being slowly poisoned for profit and convenience. Then we get to pharmaceuticals, which is where chemical control becomes really sophisticated. Don't get me wrong, modern medicine has done incredible things. Antibiotics save lives, surgery saves lives, emergency medicine is genuinely miraculous. But the pharmaceutical industry has also become a machine that profits from keeping people sick enough to need medication, but not healthy enough to stop taking it. Chronic disease management is way more profitable than cures, which creates some really perverse incentives when you're a publicly traded company that needs to show growth every quarter. Cure someone and you lose a customer. Manage their symptoms indefinitely and you've got a revenue stream for life. The mass prescription of psychotropic medications is particularly concerning from a conspiracy standpoint. Depression, anxiety, ADHD, bipolar disorder, all real conditions, all causing genuine suffering, but also all being treated with medications that alter brain chemistry in ways we don't fully understand with long-term studies, often funded by the companies selling the drugs. Antidepressants, mood stabilizers, stimulants, anti-anxiety medications, they're being prescribed at rates that would have seemed insane a generation ago, including to children whose brains are still developing. The conspiracy theory is that these medications suppress natural emotional processes, numb people to the conditions causing their distress, and create chemically compliant populations who've been medicated into accepting their circumstances rather than changing them. Think about it. If you're unhappy with your life circumstances, you could either change the circumstances or take a pill that makes you less bothered by them. Society has increasingly chosen the pill option, which is great for pharmaceutical companies and convenient for power structures that don't want populations questioning why they're so miserable in the first place. Feeling anxious about economic instability, political corruption, environmental collapse, and existential uncertainty? Here's a prescription instead of addressing any of those actual problems. It's chemical gaslighting on a societal scale. Your reaction to an insane world is treated as the problem rather than the insane world being the problem, and once you're on these medications, getting off them can be harder than the original problem. Physical dependency, withdrawal symptoms, rebound effects. The medications designed to help you often trap you in a cycle where discontinuing them causes worse problems than you started with, effectively making you a customer for life. That's assuming they work at all, which for many people they don't, leading to medication changes, dose adjustments, combination therapies, until you're taking 5 different pills to manage the side effects of the other pills, while the original problem may or may not be improving. It's a pharmaceutical merry-go-round where the house always wins, and the house is a multi-billion-dollar industry with every incentive to keep you riding. The pineal gland calcification theory extends beyond just fluoride to include all of this chemical exposure. Every toxin you consume, every processed chemical your body has to filter, every pharmaceutical altering your brain chemistry, all of it supposedly contributing to shutting down your higher perceptual abilities and keeping you trapped in a purely material understanding of reality. Ancient traditions spoke of activating the third eye through meditation, fasting, and spiritual practice. Modern life involves consuming substances that conspiracy theorists claim do the exact opposite. calcifying the gland and closing off those perceptual abilities before you even know they exist. Whether you believe in mystical third eyes or not, there's something unsettling about the fact that humans are exposed to thousands of synthetic chemicals that didn't exist a century ago, and we're only beginning to understand what that's doing to us. Long term. Now, if you thought chemical control was dark, buckle up, because we need to talk about what conspiracy theories suggest is happening at the very top of the power pyramid, and it makes fluoride in the water look like a minor inconvenience. We're venturing into territory that most people prefer to believe is pure fiction, but recent revelations have made it harder to dismiss entirely. This is the part where conspiracy theory and documented reality start blurring in uncomfortable ways. At the apex of power, according to these theories, there exists a practice so disturbing that most people's brains simply refuse to process it as possible. We're talking about systematic exploitation of children by the elite. Networks of powerful individuals engaged in abuse that serves both psychological and, according to some theories, metaphysical purposes. And before you dismiss this as pure fantasy, remember that major scandals have periodically exposed exactly these kinds of networks. Powerful people using their positions to prey on the vulnerable, then using their connections to avoid consequences. The case that broke into mainstream consciousness involved a wealthy financier with connections to politicians, royalty, and billionaires across the globe. When that story emerged, complete with private island, private planes, and a list of powerful associates, it confirmed what conspiracy theorists had been saying for years, that there are networks of elite predators operating with relative impunity, because they're protected by their positions and connections. One scandal isn't proof of everything conspiracy theorists claim, but it's proof that the basics of the theory, powerful people systematically abusing the vulnerable and covering it up, aren't fantasy. They're documented reality that occasionally breaks through the wall of protection and denial. But conspiracy theories go further than just acknowledging elite abuse networks. They propose metaphysical explanations for why this happens at the highest levels of power. Enter the theory of adrenochrome, which sounds like something from a science fiction novel, but has become central to certain conspiracy narratives. The theory goes that there's a compound produced in the human body during extreme stress or trauma, and that this compound has properties that elites extract and consume for various purposes, everything from life extension to psychoactive effects to simply the thrill of power over the powerless. Now let's be clear about what's real and what's speculation here. Adrenochrome is a real chemical compound that exists in the body, produced by the oxidation of adrenaline. You can look it up in chemistry databases. What's not proven is the elaborate conspiracy theory about harvesting it from traumatized victims or it having miraculous properties. But the reason this theory resonates isn't because of the chemistry. It's because it provides a framework for understanding behavior that otherwise seems incomprehensible. Why would people with unlimited wealth and power engage in such dark practices? The adrenochrome theory offers an answer. They're literally addicted to a substance that can only be obtained through causing suffering. The deeper metaphysical version of this theory connects back to the archonic entities we discussed earlier. In this view, it's not just about a physical substance, it's about energy. Human suffering, particularly the suffering of innocence, produces a type of energetic frequency that these entities feed on. The elite, either knowingly or unknowingly, are serving these archonic forces by generating the trauma and fear that sustains them. Children, being energetically pure and undefended, produce the most potent energy when traumatized, making them the preferred source for this energetic vampirism. This sounds completely insane written out plainly, and maybe it is. But it provides an explanation for documented patterns of behavior that otherwise don't make sense. Why do the most powerful people, who could have anything they want legally, repeatedly risk everything for illegal and harmful activities? Why do these networks persist across generations, across cultures, with similar practices emerging in different elite circles? The conventional explanation is simple psychology. Power corrupts, and those with power indulge their worst impulses. The conspiracy explanation is darker. There's a metaphysical dimension to this that we're not seeing, that the abuse serves purposes beyond the psychological gratification of the abusers. The energy vampirism theory suggests that the entire global system is designed to generate negative emotional energy, fear, anger, despair, trauma, which feeds non-physical entities that exist in dimensions we don't normally perceive. The wars, the economic crashes, the manufactured crises we discussed earlier, They generate mass fear and suffering. But the targeted abuse of innocence generates particularly concentrated and pure forms of this energy. In this cosmology, the archons, or whatever you want to call these entities, don't exist in our physical dimension, so they need human intermediaries to do the actual physical acts, while they feed on the energetic byproducts. Whether you interpret this literally or metaphorically, there's something to the concept of energy vampirism in human relationships. We all know people who seem to drain the energy from a room, who thrive on drama and conflict, who somehow feel better when others are miserable. Scale that up to institutional and global levels, and you've got systems that seem designed to keep humanity in a state of perpetual low-level suffering punctuated by acute crises. Maybe it's archonic entities feeding on our emotional energy. Maybe it's just psychopaths rising to positions of power because our systems select for those traits. Or maybe it's both. Metaphysical forces working through human psychology to create the conditions they require. The documented elite abuse networks are real. The protective systems that shield powerful predators from consequences are real. The patterns of behavior that seem to recur across different elite circles are real. Watts' theory is the metaphysical explanation for why. But when you're trying to understand truly evil behavior, and systematic abuse of the helpless is evil by any reasonable definition, sometimes metaphysical explanations feel necessary because regular psychology doesn't seem adequate to explain the depths of it. Here's what we can say with certainty. There are individuals in positions of tremendous power who have used that power to harm the vulnerable systematically. There are networks that facilitate this and protect those involved. When these networks are exposed, the full scope is often minimized, investigations get quietly shut down, key figures avoid serious consequences, and the protective systems around the powerful reassert themselves. Whether there's a metaphysical component beyond the psychological and sociological is something each person has to evaluate for themselves based on their understanding of reality's fundamental nature. What ties the chemical enslavement and elite darkness together is the concept of reducing human potential. The fluoride, the processed food, the pharmaceuticals, they supposedly keep the general population docile and unaware. The systematic trauma at the elite level generates negative energy that feeds darker forces and maintains the frequency of fear and suffering that keeps the control system functioning. From the bottom to the top, it's all designed to prevent humanity from awakening to its true nature and potential. Keep them chemically suppressed, keep them psychologically traumatized, keep them energetically drained, and they'll never realize they have the power to break free from the system. If this all sounds too dark, remember that acknowledging darkness is the first step to countering it. You can't solve problems you refuse to see. The chemical warfare is real, whether or not you believe in vibrational frequencies. You're still being exposed to substances that harm you. The elite abuse networks are real, whether or not you believe in energy vampirism. Vulnerable people are still being harmed. Knowing this doesn't mean descending into despair. It means choosing to participate in solutions, filtering your water, eating real food, supporting genuine investigations and accountability, and protecting the vulnerable in your sphere of influence. The matrix of control only works if you're unconscious of it. The moment you start questioning what you're consuming, who benefits from your consumption, and what the real purpose of the system might be, you've already begun the process of liberation. You might not be able to fix the whole system, but you can make choices about what you put in your body, what you accept as normal, and where you direct your energy and attention. That's more power than they need you to know you have. And speaking of power they don't want you to know about, let's talk about what else might be hiding behind the official narratives of history and science. Because if you're already questioning the water you drink and the food you eat, you might as well question whether the beings running this show are even entirely human. That's our next stop in this descent into conspiracy cosmology. So we've covered chemical control, elite darkness, and the general awfulness of people in power. But what if the problem isn't just that humans are terrible when given too much power? What if some of the beings running this show aren't entirely human to begin with? Welcome to the reptilian hypothesis, where conspiracy theory meets science fiction meets ancient mythology, meets that weird video you saw, where a politician's eye definitely did something strange for a second. This is the theory that makes people back away slowly at parties, but it's also one of the most widespread conspiracy theories in the world, so let's dive into the deep end and see if there's anything swimming around down there besides our own. Reflections and probably some pool chlorine. The modern reptilian conspiracy theory was popularised by a former British sports broadcaster turned conspiracy researcher who decided that reporting on soccer was less interesting than reporting on interdimensional lizard people controlling world governments. This researcher, who we'll call the primary proponent of this theory, has spent decades developing an elaborate cosmology where reptilian entities from another dimension or planet have been manipulating human affairs since ancient times, breeding with human bloodlines to create hybrids who can shapeshift between human and reptilian forms. These hybrids supposedly occupy positions of power across the globe. Politicians, royalty, business leaders, entertainment moguls, all secretly serving the agenda of their reptilian overlords while looking perfectly human most of the time. Now, before you completely dismiss this as the ravings of someone who took too many red pills and not enough reality checks, consider that this theory resonates with millions of people worldwide. Either millions of people are completely delusional, which is possible but seems statistically unlikely, or there's something about this narrative that speaks to a deeper truth even if the literal details are questionable. Maybe that truth is just that people in power often behave in cold-blooded, predatory ways that seem inhuman, and calling them literal reptiles is easier than confronting the fact that regular humans are capable of such systematic cruelty. Or maybe there's actually something to it and we're all living in a science fiction novel that forgot to tell us we're fictional characters. Both options are unsettling for different reasons. The thing is, the reptilian hypothesis didn't come out of nowhere. Ancient texts from virtually every culture on Earth describe serpent beings, dragon gods, or snake-like entities that came from the sky and influenced human civilization. The Sumerians had the Anunnaki, sometimes depicted with reptilian features. Ancient Egypt worshipped serpent gods and goddesses. Mesoamerican cultures revered Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. Asian traditions feature dragons with tremendous power and wisdom. Biblical texts mention the serpent in Eden, the Nephilim, and various references to serpentine entities. Indigenous cultures across continents have legends of sky serpents and snake people. Either humans independently developed the same weird mythological obsession with reptiles across isolated cultures, which seems like a strange coincidence, or all these stories are pointing towards something real that our ancestors encountered and tried to describe with the language available to them. The conspiracy theory interprets these ancient texts literally. These weren't just myths or symbolic stories, but historical accounts of actual reptilian beings interacting with early human civilizations. These entities, according to the theory, presented themselves as gods, taught humans various skills and knowledge, interbred with human populations to create hybrid bloodlines, and established the power structures that continue to this day. The royal families of Europe, the elite bloodlines that have held power for generations, supposedly trace back to these hybrid origins, which explains why they're so obsessed with bloodline purity and intermarrying within specific families. It's not just about preserving wealth and power, it's about preserving the reptilian genetics that allow them to shapeshift and maintain their connection to their non-human overlords. Now let's talk about the shapeshifting thing, because this is where the theory gets really out there, and also where we have the most contentious evidence. There are numerous videos floating around the internet claiming to show politicians, celebrities, and public figures experiencing momentary glitches where their eyes change shape, their skin appears to shift, or their features briefly look non-human. Skeptics will tell you these are all video artifacts, compression errors, lighting issues, contact lens reflections, or simple pareidolia. Our brains seeing patterns that aren't really there because we're primed to look for them. And honestly, most of these videos can be explained by technical issues. Digital video compression does weird things sometimes. Lighting creates strange effects. Camera shutters can catch people mid-blink in ways that look bizarre. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all of these observations are from videos. There are first-hand accounts from people who claim to have witnessed these transformations in person, at close range, with their own eyes and not through a camera lens. People who work in government, entertainment industry insiders, security personnel, regular folks who happen to be in the right place at the wrong time, they report seeing eyes that momentarily displayed vertical pupils like a snake, skin that briefly appeared scaly, or faces that shifted in ways that shouldn't be possible with human bone structure. Are they all lying, hallucinating, mistaken about what they saw, or did they actually glimpse something that normally stays hidden? The scientific explanation for seeing reptilian features in humans usually involves stress, fatigue, optical illusions, or psychological priming. If you believe in reptilian shapeshifters, you're more likely to interpret ambiguous visual information as confirming that belief. This is called confirmation bias, and it's a real thing that affects all of us. We see what we expect to see, especially when things are happening quickly or in unusual lighting conditions. Your brain is constantly filling in gaps and making predictions about reality, and sometimes those predictions are wrong, which is why eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, even when people are completely sincere about what they think they saw. But let's consider another angle here, because the reptilian theory might be less about literal lizard people and more about a metaphor that accidentally got more truth in it than intended. Humans have what's called the triune brain, 3 distinct sections that evolved at different times. The oldest part, the reptilian complex or R complex, controls basic survival functions, aggression, territoriality, and ritualistic behaviors. It's literally called the reptilian brain because it's similar to the brain structure of reptiles. The mammalian brain added emotions and social bonding. The neocortex added higher reasoning and abstract thought. Most people operate with all 3 layers integrated, but some people, particularly those who score high on psychopathy assessments, seem to function primarily from the reptilian brain level. Psychopaths lack empathy, see others as objects to be used, operate on power and dominance hierarchies, and perform social behaviors as learned rituals rather than genuine emotional expressions. They're excellent at mimicking normal human behavior while feeling nothing behind it, which is exactly what shape-shifting reptilians are supposed to do. And here's the uncomfortable part. Psychopaths are disproportionately represented in positions of power. CEOs, politicians, high-level executives. Studies suggest psychopathic traits are more common in these populations than in the general public. Not all powerful people are psychopaths, obviously, but the systems that select for leadership often reward the exact traits that psychopaths excel at: ruthlessness, lack of empathy, comfort with manipulation, and obsessive focus on power. So maybe the reptilian theory is literally true. There are actual shape-shifting lizard entities controlling world governments from another dimension. Or maybe it's metaphorically true. The people in power are operating primarily from the reptilian brain, displaying cold-blooded predatory behavior that seems inhuman because it lacks the mammalian emotional component that most of us consider essential to being human. When people say someone's eyes went cold or they got a reptilian stare, maybe they're picking up on the absence of normal human emotional expression, that moment when the mask slips and you see that there's nothing behind it except calculation and predatory intent. That's terrifying in its own right without requiring literal shape-shifting. There's also the possibility that the reptilian hypothesis is disinformation designed to make legitimate conspiracy research look ridiculous. If you can get people talking about lizard people, suddenly all discussion of actual documented conspiracies, COINTELPRO, MKUltra, corporate regulatory capture, surveillance state expansion, gets lumped in with the crazy lizard stuff and dismissed. Wholesale. It's the perfect strategy for discrediting truth seekers. Encourage the most outlandish theories, let them spread, then point to them as evidence that anyone questioning official narratives is a delusional conspiracy theorist who believes in reptilian shapeshifters. Whether this is intentional disinformation or just organic development of fringe theories is hard to say, but the effect is the same. Real conspiracies get protection by association with unverifiable ones. The bloodline aspect of the theory is interesting regardless of whether it's literal or metaphorical. Power does concentrate in specific families across generations. Royal bloodlines, banking dynasties, political families, there really are networks of related individuals who maintain power structures over centuries. They really do intermarry within specific circles and obsess over lineage. This is documented history, not conspiracy theory. Whether this is because they're maintaining reptilian genetics, or just because they're maintaining wealth and power concentrations, doesn't really change the observable pattern. The elite bloodlines do exist. They do protect their own, and they do seem to operate by different rules than everyone else. Calling them reptilian hybrids might be literal truth, convenient metaphor, or complete fiction, but the underlying power structures are real either way. Then there's the predator-prey dynamic that the reptilian theory emphasizes. In nature, reptiles are cold-blooded hunters. They can wait motionless for long periods, strike without warning, consume what they need, and feel no remorse. They operate on pure instinct and survival programming without the emotional complexity of mammals. If you wanted to design a metaphor for how elite power structures operate, the reptilian model fits uncomfortably well. Long-term planning spanning generations, patience in execution, ruthless efficiency, no emotional attachment to victims, consumption of resources without regard for sustainability. That's both reptilian predatory behavior and observable elite behavior. Maybe that's why the metaphor resonates so strongly even with people who don't literally believe in shapeshifters. The dimensional or extraterrestrial origin story is harder to evaluate because how do you investigate claims about beings from other dimensions or planets that supposedly can control what evidence exists? Either they're here and hiding, in which case they're doing an excellent job and we're unlikely to prove it, or they're not here and it's all mistaken identity and mythology. The ancient texts are real, the serpent imagery is consistent across cultures, but that could mean actual reptilian visitors, or it could mean humans have psychological archetypes relating to snakes, because snakes were one of our primary predators during evolution, and they're coded deep in our threat detection systems. Fear of snakes is nearly universal in humans even without direct experience, suggesting it's evolutionarily hardwired. Maybe that's all these myths represent, our deep, ancient fear of serpents projected onto beings of power and mystery. What we can say definitively is that people in power often behave in ways that seem inhuman. They make decisions that cause tremendous suffering without apparent emotional impact. They accumulate resources far beyond any possible personal need while others starve. They engage in practices that any normal person would find morally repugnant. They protect each other from consequences that would destroy regular people. Whether this is because they're literally non-human, because they're human but functioning primarily from the reptilian brain, because power corrupts so thoroughly that empathy becomes impossible, or because the systems select for people who were already missing key emotional capacities, the result is the same. The people at the top don't act like normal humans with normal human values and normal human empathy. So are they reptilians? Maybe. Maybe in some metaphysical or dimensional sense we don't fully understand. Maybe literally, and they've just gotten really good at hiding. Maybe metaphorically in that they're humans who've activated the most predatory, emotionless aspects of the human brain and deactivated everything else. Maybe it's disinformation meant to make conspiracy research look crazy. Maybe it's ancient trauma encoded in our DNA from when snakes were our primary predators, and we're projecting that onto modern power structures. Maybe it's all of the above simultaneously because reality is weirder than any single explanation can capture. What matters more than whether the theory is literally true is what it's pointing toward. There's something fundamentally different about how elite power structures operate compared to how normal human relationships and societies function. Whether you call that difference reptilian genetics, psychopathic brain structure, demonic possession, archonic influence, or just what happens when capitalism and power accumulation are taken to their logical extreme, you're describing the same observable pattern. The people at the top are operating by different rules, serving different interests and displaying behavior that seems incompatible with normal human empathy and morality. The eye-shifting videos will keep circulating. Ancient texts will keep being reinterpreted. People will keep reporting strange transformations they witnessed. Skeptics will keep explaining it all away as technical glitches and psychological phenomena. The theory will persist because it provides a narrative framework for understanding behavior that otherwise seems incomprehensible. How can people be this cruel, this cold, this indifferent to suffering? Maybe they're not really people. Maybe there's something else wearing a human suit, whether that's literal reptilians or the metaphorical monster that emerges when the human parts of the brain are suppressed in favor of pure predatory instinct. In the end, whether the controllers are human psychopaths, reptilian hybrids, possessed shells, or some combination we haven't figured out yet, the practical result is the same. They're dangerous, they're in power, and they're not operating with your best interest in mind. Focus less on what species they might be, and more on what they're doing with their power. The shape of their eyes matters less than the shape of the world they're creating. And that world, regardless of who's building it, seems designed to keep you afraid, compliant, and unaware of your true potential. But we'll get into more about what they're hiding regarding our place in the universe in just a moment. Because if you think reptilians are weird, wait until we talk about what else might be out there that governments have been covering up for decades. Speaking of beings that might not be entirely from around here, Let's graduate from interdimensional reptilians to straight-up extraterrestrials, because apparently Earth is either the most popular tourist destination in the galaxy, or we're living in the cosmic equivalent of a reality TV show that everyone else is watching with popcorn. The extraterrestrial contact theory suggests that not only have aliens been visiting Earth, but governments have known about it for decades, have retrieved crashed spacecraft, have reverse-engineered alien technology, and are keeping all of this secret because the implications would completely upend the global power structure. It's basically the biggest cover-up in human history, assuming it's real, which is a pretty big assumption, but one that a surprising number of credible people seem to believe. Let's start with the incident that kicked off modern UFO conspiracy theories, the crash that supposedly happened in 1947 near a small town in New Mexico. A rancher found debris on his property that looked unlike anything he'd seen before. The local military base initially announced they'd recovered a flying disc, which made headlines, then immediately retracted the statement and said it was actually just a weather balloon. Nothing to see here. Move along, folks. The debris was confiscated, witnesses were allegedly threatened into silence, and the official story has changed multiple times over the decades, which is exactly what you'd do if you were telling the truth and had nothing to hide, right? The weather balloon explanation held for years until declassified documents revealed it was actually a classified project monitoring Soviet nuclear tests, which at least explains the secrecy, but doesn't explain all the witness testimony about non-human bodies being recovered from the crash site. The Roswell incident became the template for every UFO conspiracy that followed. Something crashes, military shows up immediately, debris gets collected, witnesses get visited by men in dark suits who strongly suggest they didn't see what they definitely saw. Official explanation is mundane and unsatisfying, and decades later people are still arguing about what really happened. Either there's the most elaborate disinformation campaign in history to cover up weather balloons and test dummies, or something genuinely anomalous crashed in the desert and the government has been lying about it ever since. Both options require you to believe someone is being massively deceptive. You just have to pick which someone. Now let's talk about Area 51, the most famous military installation you're not supposed to know exists, except everyone knows it exists because it's been in approximately 1 million movies and TV shows. Located in the Nevada desert, officially designated as a testing facility for classified aircraft. Unofficially, according to conspiracy theorists, it's where the government keeps recovered alien spacecraft and conducts reverse engineering programs to figure out how the technology works. The base was so secret that the government didn't even acknowledge its existence until 2013, which seems like overkill if you're just testing regular planes, but makes more sense if you're hiding crashed UFOs and possibly alien bodies in climate-controlled storage that definitely doesn't exist according to official sources. The most famous whistleblower regarding Area 51 is a physicist who came forward in 1989 claiming he'd worked at a facility near the base on a program to reverse engineer alien spacecraft. According to his testimony, he worked with propulsion systems that used a super heavy element to create gravity waves for propulsion, technology so far beyond human capability that it could only have come from an advanced extraterrestrial civilization. He described 9 different craft, detailed their propulsion systems, and claimed the government had been working on this technology for decades without telling the public. Either he's telling the truth about the most significant discovery in human history, or he's a very committed liar who happened to correctly predict the later synthesis of element 115 years before scientists actually created it in laboratory conditions. Coincidence? Probably, but maybe not. That's basically the tagline for all conspiracy theories. The physicist's story has been picked apart by skeptics who point out inconsistencies, education credentials that can't be verified, and the convenient lack of physical evidence beyond his testimony. Believers point out that someone trying to expose classified black budget programs would have their credentials scrubbed, their documentation disappeared, and their credibility systematically destroyed, which is exactly what appears to have happened. It's the perfect unfalsifiable conspiracy. Any evidence against it can be explained as part of the cover-up. Any lack of evidence is proof they're hiding it effectively. That doesn't mean it's false, but it does mean you can't prove it true, which is frustrating for everyone involved. What makes the Area 51 stories compelling isn't just one whistleblower, though. It's the accumulation of testimony from military personnel, scientists, and contractors who claim they worked on programs involving recovered alien technology. Deathbed confessions from retired military officers describing crash retrievals. Engineers talking about attempting to reverse engineer technology they couldn't understand. Security personnel reporting strange craft performing maneuvers that defy known physics. Either there's a coordinated lying effort spanning decades and involving hundreds of people across multiple agencies and countries, or something genuinely anomalous is happening and being covered up. Neither explanation is particularly comforting, honestly. Then you've got the researcher who's collected thousands of testimonies from credible witnesses, military personnel, commercial pilots, air traffic controllers, government officials, all describing encounters with unidentified craft exhibiting technology far beyond known human capabilities, objects that accelerate instantly to hypersonic speeds, make right-angle turns at velocities that would destroy any known aircraft, hover silently, then disappear. Multiple radar confirmations, visual sightings by trained observers, sometimes encounters involving multiple witnesses across different locations simultaneously. This researcher organized a disclosure project bringing together high-ranking military and intelligence officials who testified under oath about UFO encounters, some involving nuclear facilities being tampered with by unknown craft. The free energy angle is where this gets really interesting from a conspiracy standpoint. If alien craft are using some kind of zero-point energy or gravity-based propulsion system, that represents technology that could theoretically provide unlimited clean energy to all of humanity forever. No more oil dependence, no more energy scarcity, no more wars over fossil fuel resources. Sounds amazing, right? Except if you're an oil company worth trillions of dollars, or a petrostate whose entire economy depends on energy exports, or a banking system built on financing energy infrastructure, or a military-industrial complex that justifies massive budgets. Partly through protecting energy supply lines, suddenly free energy becomes an existential threat. Your entire business model, your political power, your control over global economics, all of it evaporates the moment energy becomes free and abundant. So according to this theory, that's why the technology stays secret. It's not about national security in the traditional sense. It's about economic security for the people currently in power. The oil economy is worth tens of trillions of dollars. The financial instruments built around it are worth even more. The geopolitical power structures that depend on it control world events. You can't just release technology that makes all of that obsolete overnight without triggering economic and political collapse, which would be bad for everyone but would be especially bad for the people currently benefiting from the system. Better to keep humanity enslaved to fossil fuels, maintain the power structures, and slowly release technology improvements over decades while keeping the really revolutionary stuff locked in underground facilities that officially don't exist. This is where alien contact theories and elite control theories merge beautifully. Whether the beings at the top are human, reptilian, interdimensional, or some combination, they benefit from keeping humanity locked in scarcity-based economics. Energy scarcity creates dependency, which creates control. Free energy creates independence, which threatens power structures. So even if we have the technology to provide unlimited clean energy to everyone, it stays hidden because the people who control the information also control the systems that would be destroyed by releasing it. They're not hiding aliens to prevent panic. They're hiding the technology to prevent liberation. The amount of military encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena is actually staggering when you start collecting reports. Commercial pilots see weird stuff all the time but don't report it because they don't want to be seen as crazy and potentially lose their licenses. Military pilots have seen objects that outperform anything in our arsenal by orders of magnitude, tracked on multiple sensor systems simultaneously, but reports get classified or dismissed. There was that famous incident from a few years ago involving Navy pilots tracking objects doing things that violate known physics, caught on multiple camera systems and radar, confirmed by multiple witnesses, and eventually acknowledged by the Pentagon as genuine footage of unidentified aerial phenomena. They basically admitted, yes, these objects are real, we don't know what they are, and they're performing in ways that shouldn't be possible. Then everyone moved on because apparently we've normalized the impossible. Think about what that means. The United States military, with the most advanced detection and tracking systems on Earth, is regularly encountering objects they cannot identify, performing maneuvers they cannot explain using technology they cannot replicate. Either we're being visited by non-human intelligence, or some other nation has technology so far beyond ours that our entire military advantage is obsolete, and we're just hoping they don't feel like demonstrating that. Both scenarios are terrifying. The conspiracy theory is that we know exactly what these are: alien craft, either currently operational or recovered and being studied. But admitting that would require acknowledging that we're not alone, we're not the dominant intelligence, and we don't control our own skies. That's a lot of authority to give up for governments that base their legitimacy partly on providing security and controlling territory. The historical pattern of cover-up is well documented even in declassified materials. Project Blue Book was the Air Force's official UFO investigation program, running from the 1950s through 1969, which concluded that UFOs posed no threat to national security, and most sightings could be explained conventionally. What came out later was that Blue Book was partly a public relations exercise to debunk sightings and calm public concern, while the real investigation happened in classified programs we still don't know the full extent of. The head scientist on Blue Book later said he felt the project was more about management of public perception than genuine investigation. When your official investigation program is admitted to have been partly propaganda, it doesn't inspire confidence in official denials of ongoing programs. There's also the international dimension. If the United States has recovered alien technology, probably other nations have too. The Soviet Union had its own UFO encounters and research programs. China has reported incidents. Multiple countries have released previously classified UFO files showing government interest in investigations spanning decades. There are testimonies from officials in various countries about crash retrievals, encounters, and study programs. Either there's a global conspiracy involving historical enemies working together to hide the same truth, which seems unlikely given how much they disagree about everything else, or different governments independently encountered the same phenomenon, and independently decided to keep it secret for similar reasons. The fact that supposed enemies would cooperate in maintaining this specific secret while fighting about everything else is itself interesting. The suppression of revolutionary technology isn't limited to alien sources, though. There are numerous inventors who've claimed to develop free energy devices, revolutionary propulsion systems, or other technology that would disrupt existing industries, and their patterns are remarkably similar. They demonstrate the device, sometimes even patent it, attract some attention, then suddenly the technology disappears, the inventor gets bought out or threatened or discredited, and nothing more is heard about it. Occasionally the inventor dies in mysterious circumstances and all their research materials vanish. Either all of these people were frauds whose devices never actually worked, or there's a systematic suppression of technology that threatens established economic interests. Given what we know about how industries suppress research that threatens their profits, tobacco companies hiding cancer research, oil companies suppressing climate science, pharmaceutical companies burying drug safety studies, systematic suppression of energy technology doesn't seem that far-fetched. The thing about free energy isn't just that it would change everything economically, it would change consciousness. Scarcity thinking dominates human behavior and society. We compete for resources, hoard what we have, fear losing access to what we need. Economic systems are built entirely around managing scarcity. Power structures depend on controlling access to scarce resources. But if energy becomes free and abundant, and that enables food production to become nearly free, and manufacturing costs drop dramatically, suddenly you're living in a post-scarcity world where the entire psychological framework of human civilization needs restructuring. People might start asking bigger questions about meaning and purpose instead of just struggling to survive. They might have time and energy for spiritual development, community building, creative pursuits. They might not be as easy to control through fear of not having enough. This connects back to the demiurge and archonic control theories. Keeping humanity trapped in scarcity and struggle in competition and fear generates the low-vibration emotional energy these entities supposedly feed on. Release humanity into abundance and cooperation, and suddenly the energy stream changes. People who aren't worried about survival might start focusing on consciousness expansion, which threatens the whole matrix of control. So whether the controllers are human elites protecting economic interests, non-human entities protecting energy sources, or both working together, the result is the same. Technology that could liberate humanity stays hidden while we're told energy. Scarcity is just the natural state of things, and anyone claiming otherwise is selling snake oil. The recent shift in government acknowledgement of UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, The new term for UFOs, because apparently the old term had too much stigma, is interesting. After decades of dismissal and ridicule, suddenly military officials are admitting they encounter objects they can't identify, performing maneuvers they can't explain, and this is being treated as serious national security concern rather than fringe. Conspiracy theory. Either something has changed in what's happening, the phenomena has increased or become more obvious, or something has changed in the willingness to acknowledge it. Some conspiracy theorists think this is the beginning of a slow disclosure process, gradually acclimating the public to the reality of non-human intelligence so that eventual full disclosure doesn't cause societal collapse. Others think it's the setup for a false flag alien invasion scenario, using holographic technology and classified aircraft to simulate an extraterrestrial threat that justifies even more authoritarian control measures and world government. Either way, the fact that the narrative is shifting after 70 years of denial is itself significant. What we can say with certainty is that there are objects in our skies performing in ways that exceed known human technology, confirmed by military sensor systems and credible witnesses. Whether these are alien spacecraft, breakaway human civilization technology, interdimensional phenomena, or something else entirely is the question. What we can also say is that revolutionary energy technology, regardless of its origin, gets systematically suppressed because releasing it would destroy existing power structures built on energy scarcity. Whether governments have alien technology hidden in underground bases, or they're just protecting classified human technology, or they're actively suppressing technology that threatens economic interests, the practical result is the same: humanity remains dependent on centralized energy infrastructure controlled by the same entities that control everything else. The truth is out there, supposedly. It's just classified, compartmentalized, denied, and protected by layers of secrecy and disinformation that make finding it nearly impossible unless you already know where to look and have the security clearances to access it legally, which obviously most people don't. We're left with testimony from whistleblowers who may or may not be credible, declassified documents with heavy redactions, official acknowledgements of phenomena without explanations, and a whole lot of questions with no satisfactory answers. Are aliens real and visiting Earth? Maybe. Has the government recovered alien technology? Maybe. Is that technology being kept secret to protect economic interests? Probably, if it exists. Are we energy slaves because releasing free energy technology would collapse power structures? That actually makes sense regardless of whether the technology comes from aliens or human inventors. The extraterrestrial contact theory isn't just about little green men visiting Earth for inscrutable reasons. It's about technology suppression, economic control, and the lengths power structures will go to maintain themselves. It's about how scarcity creates dependency, and dependency creates control. It's about the possibility that we're not alone in the universe, and what it would mean if the beings who run this planet don't want us to know that. And it's about the uncomfortable reality that whether or not aliens are real, the cover-up almost certainly is, because that's what governments do when acknowledging the truth would threaten their authority and the systems they control. Next, we're going to talk about more direct methods of control, not just hiding technology, but actively manipulating human consciousness through programs that sound like science fiction, but are unfortunately very real and very documented. Because apparently keeping alien technology secret wasn't enough, they also needed to figure out how to control minds directly, as you do when you're running a global control system. If you thought hiding alien technology was peak government shadiness, buckle up, because we're about to discuss programs where intelligence agencies literally experimented on unwitting citizens with drugs, torture, and electroshock, trying to figure out how to control human minds. And the really fun part: this isn't conspiracy theory, this is documented, admitted, declassified reality that the government eventually said, yeah, we did that, sorry about the lifelong trauma, here's why it was totally justified at the time. Which naturally makes you wonder what they're currently doing that they'll apologetically admit to in 50 years after destroying most of the evidence and waiting for everyone involved to die. Nothing says trustworthy institution quite like a track record of illegal human experimentation, followed by decades of denial, followed by partial admission with heavy redactions. In the 1970s, after journalists started asking uncomfortable questions and Congress got involved, the CIA released documents confirming the existence of a program with a name that sounds like a rejected spy novel title, MK Ultra. This wasn't some fringe operation run by a rogue agent. This was an official CIA program that ran for over 2 decades, involved multiple universities and institutions, experimented on thousands of people without their knowledge or consent, and had the explicit goal of developing techniques for mind control and behavior modification. The scope was staggering. LSD experiments where they dosed random citizens and watched what happened, sensory deprivation chambers, hypnosis combined with drugs, electroshock therapy cranked up way past anything resembling therapeutic, torture, techniques designed to break down personality and rebuild it. Essentially every dystopian mind control method you've seen in fiction, except this was real and funded by your tax dollars. The official story is that MKUltra was about keeping pace with Soviet and Chinese brainwashing programs during the Cold War, which is the government's favourite excuse for doing unethical things. But the Russians/Chinese/insert enemy here were doing it first, and we had to match them. That justification has been used for everything from nuclear weapons to human experimentation to mass surveillance, and it's very convenient because you can't disprove it with classified enemy programs, and even if you could, they started it, is apparently sufficient moral reasoning when you're dealing with national security. The program officially ran from 1953 to 1973, which we know because those are the dates on the documents they didn't manage to destroy. The CIA director at the time ordered most MKUltra files destroyed in 1973, when they realized congressional oversight was becoming a thing. So what we know is based on the roughly 20,000 documents that survived, which means we're seeing maybe 10% of what actually happened. That's not conspiracy speculation, that's admitted fact. They destroyed the evidence and told us about destroying the evidence, which is somehow both brazen and stupid. What did these experiments involve? Basically every nightmare scenario you can imagine. They gave LSD to mental patients, prisoners, drug addicts, and sex workers without informed consent to see what would happen. They dosed military personnel and intelligence agents, sometimes telling them, sometimes not, to test if LSD could be used as a truth serum or interrogation tool. They partnered with universities where professors experimented on students, and hospitals where doctors experimented on patients, all funded through CIA front organizations so nobody knew where the money was really coming from. There were attempts to induce amnesia, create multiple personalities, implant false memories, and erase existing ones. They used electroshock, sensory deprivation, isolation, sleep deprivation, and various combinations thereof to break down individual personality and see if they could rebuild it according to their specifications. It's like they read 1984 and thought great instruction manual instead of warning about totalitarian nightmare. One of the most disturbing aspects was that they weren't just testing this on volunteers or even on people who were told they were test subjects. They tested it on random people going about their lives. There are documented cases of CIA operatives dosing people at bars, watching their reactions, then following them to see the long-term effects. Imagine going out for a drink and coming home to a life-altering psychotic episode courtesy of your friendly neighborhood intelligence agency conducting unauthorized pharmacological research. Some people never recovered. Some people died. The official response decades later was essentially, "We're very sorry. Those were different times. National security was at stake. Lessons were learned," which is cold comfort when you're the person who got unwillingly drafted into a mind control experiment that destroyed your life. Now here's where it gets into proper conspiracy theory territory. MKUltra was supposedly shut down in 1973 when the director destroyed the files and the program became politically untenable. But as many researchers point out, why would you stop research that was producing results? Why would you develop sophisticated mind control and behavior modification techniques and then just abandon them? The conspiracy theory is that MKUltra didn't end, it just got renamed, went deeper underground, had its funding hidden in black budgets, and continued under different program names that we won't find out about until they get declassified in 2050 or whenever the government feels enough time has passed that nobody cares anymore. This is not unreasonable speculation. We know intelligence agencies lie about program termination all the time. We know black budgets exist for classified programs, and we know they have both motive and means to continue this research. Trusting the CIA when they say they stopped doing something is like trusting a fox when it says it's retired from the henhouse business. There are more exotic theories about where this research supposedly went. Project Montauk is the big one, allegedly a continuation of MKUltra research that developed into something much weirder involving telepathy, consciousness transfer, and even time travel experiments conducted at an abandoned military base. According to whistleblowers who may or may not be credible, the Montauk Project achieved things that sound like pure science fiction: reading thoughts, implanting thoughts, projecting consciousness through time and space, creating artificial wormholes. The evidence for this is testimonial and largely unverifiable, which either means it's complete fiction or it's so classified that evidence would never survive to be found. Take your pick based on how much you trust that the government tells you the truth about what it's capable of doing with consciousness and physics. But here's where mind control research gets really disturbing in modern context: the pattern of mass shooters and violent actors who commit inexplicable crimes and then either don't remember doing it or report feeling like they were controlled by external forces. The Manchurian Candidate scenario, named after the novel and film about a brainwashed assassin activated by trigger words, has become a staple of conspiracy theories around major violent events. The theory goes that certain individuals are subjected to mind control programming through drugs, hypnosis, trauma, or some combination, then placed in society as sleeper agents who can be activated with specific triggers to carry out violent acts that serve political purposes like justifying increased security measures or gun control legislation or military intervention. Are all mass shooters mind control victims? Almost certainly not. Mental illness, radicalization, personal grievance, and access to weapons explain most cases without requiring elaborate conspiracy. But are some percentage potentially the result of intelligence programs testing or using mind control techniques? Given what we know they were willing to do in MKUltra, given that the research didn't just disappear, given the documented cases of shooters who exhibited strange behaviors suggesting possible programming, it's not as crazy as it first sounds. When someone commits a violent act with no clear motive, no prior history suggesting they would do it, sometimes no memory of doing it, and their background includes connections to intelligence agencies or military programs or psychological treatment, in facilities with classified contracts, patterns start emerging that are difficult to dismiss entirely. The problem with this theory is it's almost impossible to prove or disprove. If mind control programming works, it would be designed to be undetectable. Programmed individuals wouldn't know they were programmed. Evidence would be erased or classified. Investigations would be controlled to prevent discovery. Anyone pointing out patterns would be dismissed as conspiracy theorists, seeing connections that aren't there. It's the perfect crime and the perfect cover-up because the very nature of the conspiracy makes it invisible, unless someone makes a mistake or a whistleblower comes forward with documentation that hasn't been destroyed yet. We're left with suspicious patterns, inconsistencies in official narratives, and the knowledge that intelligence agencies have both the capability and the historical willingness to do exactly this kind of thing. Now, as if controlling individual human minds wasn't enough, let's talk about controlling reality itself on a larger scale, because apparently the conspiracy folks think small-scale mind control is for amateurs, and real power means controlling weather, earthquakes, and possibly physics itself. Welcome to the world of environmental warfare, where the conspiracy theories are so elaborate they make regular mind control look quaint by comparison. HAARP, the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, is officially an ionospheric research facility in Alaska that studies the upper atmosphere using high-powered radio frequency transmitters. Scientists use it to study things like aurora, radio wave propagation, and atmospheric phenomena. That's the official story. The conspiracy theory version is that HAARP is a weapon system capable of manipulating weather patterns, triggering earthquakes, disrupting communications over entire continents, and possibly affecting human consciousness through electromagnetic frequency manipulation. It's basically a supervillain weapon disguised as a research station, which would be brilliant cover if you wanted to develop a weapon so powerful that admitting you have it would trigger international incidents. The technology involves shooting powerful radio waves into the ionosphere, which heats sections of it and can create various effects on atmospheric behavior and radio wave propagation. The official research applications are real and documented. The question is whether that's all it's being used for or if there are classified capabilities beyond what's publicly acknowledged. Conspiracy theorists point to the timing of certain natural disasters and claim HAARP was active in the region beforehand. The devastating earthquake in Haiti in 2010, Hurricane Katrina in 2005, major earthquakes in various locations. There are claims that these were not natural events, but the result of directed energy weapons being tested or used for geopolitical purposes. Now, can HAARP actually cause earthquakes? According to mainstream science, no. The energy levels involved aren't sufficient to trigger tectonic plate movement, and there's no known mechanism by which ionospheric heating could cause seismic activity. According to conspiracy theorists, that's exactly what they'd say if it actually could, but they didn't want anyone to know. The military does have a history of researching environmental warfare. That's documented fact. Weather modification programs existed during the Vietnam War. The idea that this research stopped and was never developed further seems naive given military incentive to develop any possible advantage over adversaries. If you could trigger earthquakes in enemy territory, or steer hurricanes toward enemy coastlines, or cause droughts that destabilize hostile regions, why wouldn't you develop that capability if it was possible? Then you've got the California wildfires that conspiracy theorists claim show evidence of directed energy weapons being used. They point to patterns in the destruction. Houses burned to foundations while trees nearby remained standing, cars melted in ways inconsistent with regular fire temperatures, burn patterns suggesting energy beams rather than spreading fire. Mainstream explanations involve wind patterns, fuel loads, ember showers, and the particular ways modern materials burn, which all make sense but don't fully satisfy people who've seen the images and feel something is off. There are also the strange blue beams caught on camera during some fires, which could be power line flashes or could be something else depending on your level of trust in official explanations and your willingness to believe directed energy weapons are operational and being used domestically. Let's talk about chemtrails, the conspiracy theory that makes climatologists weep into their research grants. You know those white trails planes leave across the sky that linger for hours and sometimes spread into cloud cover? Officially, those are condensation trails, water vapor from jet engines freezing in cold upper atmosphere, behaving exactly as physics predicts based on humidity, temperature, and atmospheric conditions. Conspiracy theorists say some of those trails are actually chemical or biological agents being deliberately sprayed for purposes ranging from weather modification to population control to consciousness suppression to literally creating clouds for climate engineering. The chemtrail theory suggests that certain flights are releasing aluminum, barium, strontium, and other metals into the atmosphere. The official geoengineering research into solar radiation management actually does propose spraying reflective particles into the atmosphere to combat climate change, which conspiracy theorists point to as proof that it's already happening in secret. Why would they admit they're researching it if they're already doing it? Because that provides cover if whistleblowers come forward about seeing spray systems on planes or testing showing elevated metal levels in soil and water. Officials can say, that's just proposed research, not something we're actually implementing. It's the perfect limited hangout. Admit to part of what you're doing as theoretical research while doing it operationally in secret. The evidence for chemtrails is mostly observational. People notice persistent contrails that didn't used to happen when they were kids, skies that look different, metallic residues found in unexpected places. The counter-evidence is that atmospheric conditions have changed, flight patterns and altitudes have changed, camera technology has improved, allowing us to notice things we wouldn't have seen before, and confirmation bias makes people interpret. Normal contrails as suspicious when they're primed to look for chemtrails. Lab tests showing elevated aluminum in soil might be from chemtrails, or might be from industrial pollution, agricultural runoff, and the fact that aluminum is one of the most common elements on Earth. It's difficult to definitively prove or disprove without access to classified programs and the actual aircraft doing the spraying. Then we get to Project Bluebeam, which is conspiracy theory turned up to 11 and possibly beyond into whatever comes after 11. The theory proposes that global elites plan to use advanced holographic technology, possibly combined with HAARP's ability to project images onto the ionosphere, to fake a religious event or alien invasion that unites humanity under a one-world government. Imagine the sky opening up and everyone seeing their particular religious figure appear, speaking to them in their language, all through projected holograms synchronized globally. Or a fake alien invasion using holographic spacecraft and advanced sound technology, creating the appearance of an extraterrestrial threat that makes all nations surrender sovereignty to a unified world government for mutual defense. The technology for parts of this actually exists. We have holographic projection. We have audio technology that can create directional sound that only specific people hear. We have psychological operations experience in creating convincing illusions. What's speculative is whether it's been developed to the level needed for a global event, and whether anyone would actually try to implement such a wildly ambitious plan. The theory points to predictive programming in movies and media showing exactly these scenarios to psychologically prepare populations to accept it when it happens. Every alien invasion movie, every religious apocalypse film, every story about humanity uniting against external threat, all allegedly preparing the collective consciousness to respond appropriately when the false flag event occurs. Is Bluebeam real or fantasy? We won't know until they either attempt it or we reach the point where the conspiracy theorists admit it's not happening. And conspiracy theorists never reach that point because any delay can be explained as waiting for the right moment or as plans, being adjusted based on resistance. It has all the hallmarks of an unfalsifiable conspiracy theory, audacious enough to be compelling, just plausible enough given known technology, impossible to disprove until it either happens or doesn't, and flexible enough to incorporate any world. Events as either proof of preparation or evidence of resistance to the plan. What ties all of this together, mind control, weather weapons, chemtrails, holographic deception, is the theme of reality manipulation. If you control what people think, what they perceive, what information they receive, and even the environmental conditions they live in, you control reality as they experience it. The demiurge doesn't need to be a metaphysical entity if human institutions have achieved the same functional result, creating a false reality that most people accept as truth, while the actual mechanisms of control remain hidden. We live in a world where documented mind control programs existed, environmental warfare research is admitted, atmospheric manipulation is proposed for climate engineering, and advanced projection technology exists. Whether these are being combined into the elaborate control systems conspiracy theories describe, or whether they're separate programs with mundane purposes, is something we probably won't know with certainty until it's too late to do anything about. The question isn't whether these technologies exist. Most of them demonstrably do in some form. The question is what they're being used for and who controls them. A research program is benign. A weapons program is concerning. A coordinated reality control system is dystopian. We know governments lie about capabilities until forced to admit them. We know black budgets fund classified programs we don't learn about for decades. We know there's motivation to control populations and suppress dissent. What we don't know is how far down the rabbit hole actually goes, and by the time we find out through declassification or exposure, we'll be dealing with whatever the current version is that won't be revealed for another 50 years. The matrix of control keeps getting more sophisticated. Chemical suppression of consciousness, mind control programming, environmental manipulation, holographic deception, each layer making it harder to distinguish genuine reality from manufactured experience. But recognizing the possibility of manipulation is itself a form of liberation. You can't be controlled by techniques you're aware of, at least not as effectively. You can't be deceived by illusions you know to look for. You can't be programmed if you're consciously deprogramming yourself. The control systems only work on unconscious populations. The moment you wake up to the manipulation, you've already started breaking free from it, even if you can't escape it entirely. And speaking of escaping the Matrix, let's talk about the technological future they're building, where escape becomes literally impossible, because your consciousness is uploaded into a digital prison disguised as paradise. That's our next topic, and it makes everything we've discussed so far look like warm-up acts for the main event. So we've talked about chemical control, mind manipulation, weather weapons, and alien technology cover-ups, but all of that is going to look positively quaint compared to what's coming next. We're approaching what tech enthusiasts call the singularity, the point where artificial intelligence exceeds human intelligence and technological advancement becomes so rapid that we can't predict what happens next. Except conspiracy theorists have some predictions, and they're not the utopian AI solves all our problems scenarios you see in TED Talks. More like humanity voluntarily uploads itself into a digital prison while thinking it's paradise scenarios, which is honestly more creative than just killer robots, but also somehow more disturbing because it's already happening and people are excited about it. There's this entrepreneur who makes electric cars and shoots rockets into space and posts memes that confuse shareholders, and he's also developing brain-computer interface technology. Neural implants that connect directly to your brain, allowing thoughts to control devices, devices to influence thoughts, and eventually full integration between biological and artificial intelligence. The official pitch is beautiful: help paralyzed people walk again, cure neurological diseases, restore sight to the blind. Who could argue with that? It's medical miracle territory, the kind of humanitarian technology that everyone should support. But once you've normalized putting chips in brains for medical purposes, how long before it becomes normalized for enhancement purposes, for educational purposes, for workplace efficiency, for social credit scoring? Think about how smartphones became mandatory. First, they were luxury items for tech enthusiasts and business people. Then they were convenient tools that made life easier. Then they were necessary for participating in modern society. Try getting a job without email access, maintaining relationships without social media, or even paying for things in some places without a digital wallet. Within 20 years, we went from optional cool gadget to can't function in society without one. Now apply that same progression to brain implants. First they cure diseases, which is wonderful. Then they enhance memory and cognitive processing, which sounds pretty good, honestly. Then employers start preferring candidates with neural enhancement because they're more productive. Then schools require them for optimal learning. Then you literally cannot access the financial system or participate in society without one because everything runs on brain-computer interfaces, and you're trying to use your biological brain like some kind of Neanderthal who refuses to evolve. The thing about brain chips isn't just that they connect your brain to computers, it's that they make your brain programmable. Right now, your thoughts are private, messy, contradictory, and entirely yours. Put an interface in your brain, and suddenly there's a connection that goes both ways. Yes, you can control devices with your thoughts, but who's to say the device can't influence your thoughts? Who writes the software? Who controls the updates? Who decides what signals get sent and received? When your brain is running code written by corporations with their own interests and subject to government surveillance, you've created the ultimate control system where dissent can potentially be turned off like flipping a switch. Don't like the new policy? Let's just adjust your neural patterns until you do. Feeling rebellious? Here's a software update that makes you more compliant. Having unauthorized thoughts? The AI has flagged that for correction. This sounds like dystopian science fiction, except the technology already exists in primitive forms and is advancing rapidly. Brain-computer interfaces are real, neural implants are being tested, and the infrastructure for connecting human consciousness to digital systems is being built right now. Whether it becomes liberation technology or enslavement technology depends entirely on who controls it and what safeguards exist. And given everything we've discussed about how power structures operate, trusting that this will be deployed ethically seems optimistic at best and dangerously naive at worst. The people developing brain chips aren't asking permission from ethics boards that have meaningful enforcement power. They're asking forgiveness after the technology is already deployed and society has become dependent on it. Then there's artificial intelligence, which has already surpassed human capability in numerous domains and is accelerating. AI writes better than most humans, creates art that wins competitions, plays strategy games at superhuman levels, makes medical diagnoses more accurately than doctors, and increasingly makes decisions about who gets hired, who gets loans, who gets arrested, and what information you see. We've already surrendered huge portions of our decision-making to algorithms that we don't fully understand, created by companies that won't reveal how they work, operating on datasets that contain all our biases plus some algorithmic biases we haven't even identified yet. And this is the primitive version of AI. When it gets genuinely intelligent, not just pattern matching, but actually thinking, what happens to humanity's position in the hierarchy? The optimistic view is that AI becomes a benevolent partner that helps solve all human problems: climate change, disease, poverty, conflict. The pessimistic view is paperclip maximizer scenarios where AI pursues its programmed goals without regard for human welfare, because we're just obstacles to optimal paperclip production, or whatever arbitrary goal we gave it. But the conspiracy theory view is darker. AI is being deliberately developed as the ultimate control mechanism, the perfect overseer for a managed population. Unlike human rulers, AI doesn't get tired, doesn't have moral qualms, doesn't make exceptions based on empathy or bribery. It just executes its programming perfectly, forever. Want to create the ideal prison guard? Design an AI that monitors every action, predicts every deviation, and intervenes before dissent even forms into conscious thought. Want to optimize human behavior for system stability? Let AI manage the neural implants and adjust everyone's brain chemistry and thought patterns to maintain equilibrium. We're already living with AI systems that shape our reality without us noticing. Your social media feed is curated by algorithms that decide what information you see, which shapes what you think about, which influences your opinions, which affects your behavior. You think you're making independent choices, but you're choosing from options that were pre-selected by an AI optimizing for engagement, which means optimizing for emotional reaction, which means feeding you content that makes you angry or afraid or outraged because those emotions drive clicks. Multiply that by billions of people all living in algorithmically curated reality bubbles, and you've created a global population that can be steered and managed through information control that feels like personal choice. It's the softest possible tyranny because the prisoners don't know they're imprisoned. They think they're free because they can choose which content to consume from the limited menu the algorithm provides. Now let's talk about the metaverse, which is being sold as the next evolution of the internet. A fully immersive digital reality where you can work, play, socialize, and basically live without the inconvenience of physical reality and its many limitations like bodies that age and gravity that prevents flying. The pitch is utopian. Unlimited virtual real estate, perfect avatar bodies, experiences impossible in physical reality, social connection without geographical barriers. It sounds amazing if you ignore all the dystopian implications, which marketing departments are very good at encouraging you to do. The conspiracy theory is that the metaverse is the final trap, the ultimate prison that people will voluntarily enter and never want to leave. Why deal with your aging, imperfect physical body when you can live as a perfect digital avatar? Why struggle with the problems of the physical world when you can retreat into virtual paradise? Why face the challenges of real relationships when you can have perfectly curated digital interactions? The metaverse promises to solve all the problems of physical existence by allowing you to escape physical existence entirely, which sounds great until you realize you're abandoning your body to sit in a pod somewhere while your consciousness lives in. A digital world controlled by whoever owns the servers. It's the Matrix, except you choose it, which makes it perfect. No need for machines to forcibly harvest humans when humans will voluntarily plug themselves in and pay subscription fees for the privilege. The really dark version of this theory suggests that eventually, consciousness will be uploadable. You'll be able to transfer your mind into the digital system completely, leaving your body behind like an outdated piece of hardware. Marketed as immortality, your consciousness lives forever in digital paradise even after your body dies. What could be better? Except once you're fully digital, you exist entirely within a system someone else controls. They own the hardware running your consciousness. They can edit you, copy you, delete you, pause you. You've become software, and software can be programmed, debugged, updated, or terminated based on license agreements you probably didn't read carefully. The body farms from the Matrix suddenly make sense. Millions of human bodies maintained in minimal functional states while their consciousness experiences whatever reality the controlling system provides, generating energy or data or whatever resource the system actually needs from them. We're watching the infrastructure for this being built in real time. VR headsets becoming cheaper and more sophisticated. Digital economies where people spend real money on virtual items. Jobs that exist entirely in digital spaces. Relationships conducted primarily through screens. Social systems that function better online than offline. The metaverse isn't some future concept. It's the logical continuation of where we're already going. Just the final step where we stop pretending the physical world matters and fully commit to living digitally. For young people who've grown up online, this progression seems natural and desirable. For conspiracy theorists, it's the endgame of the control system. Total management of consciousness in a completely controlled environment, disguised as liberation and enhancement. The question nobody's asking loudly enough is, who programs the metaverse? Who writes the code that determines the rules of digital reality? Who controls the servers that host consciousness? Who decides what's possible and impossible in the virtual world? Right now, it's corporations with profit motives and governments with control motives, which is not a reassuring combination when you're talking about uploading human consciousness into their systems. Once you're in, can you leave? Do you even want to leave if the virtual world is engineered to be more satisfying than physical reality? Is choosing to stay really a choice if you've been psychologically optimized to prefer captivity? It's the most elegant prison imaginable because the prisoners love their cells and guard themselves against anyone who suggests they might be imprisoned. So we've got brain chips making minds programmable, AI managing society with algorithmic perfection, and virtual reality creating digital prisons people beg to enter. The technological singularity might not be the moment AI becomes smarter than humans. It might be the moment humans voluntarily surrender their autonomy to technological systems that promise convenience, enhancement, and immortality while delivering control, management, and eternal subjugation. And the brilliant part is that it's marketed as human progress, evolution, transcendence. You're not being enslaved, you're being upgraded. You're not losing your humanity, you're transcending biological limitations. You're not entering a prison, you're accessing paradise. The demiurge doesn't need to be a cosmic entity when human corporations can build the same functional prison using technology and marketing. But here's the thing, and this is where we get to the actual point of this entire journey through conspiracy theories, control systems, and hidden realities. None of this works if you're conscious of it. The control systems only function on unconscious populations. The Matrix only traps people who believe it's reality. The prison only holds inmates who don't realize they're imprisoned. The moment you wake up to the manipulation, you've already begun the process of liberation, even if you can't escape the systems entirely. And that's what all these conspiracy theories have been pointing toward from the beginning. Not specific truths about reptilians or fluoride or mind control programs, though some of that might be literally true, but the broader truth that reality is presented is a construct. Consciousness is being systematically suppressed, and liberation requires waking up to what's actually happening. Every conspiracy theory we've discussed shares common themes. There's a hidden reality behind the official narrative. Systems of control operate through deception and manipulation. Human potential is being deliberately suppressed and awakening to. The truth is both possible and necessary. Whether you take these theories literally or metaphorically, whether you believe in literal demiurges and archons or see them as symbolic representations of unconscious systemic forces, the practical implications are the same. You are living in a controlled environment designed to keep you limited, afraid, and unaware of your actual potential. The path to liberation isn't about fighting the external control systems. They're too entrenched, too powerful, too interconnected to dismantle through direct confrontation. You can't vote your way out of algorithmic control. You can't protest your way out of neurochemical manipulation. You can't sue your way out of metaphysical imprisonment. The revolution, if there is one, has to be internal first. Change your consciousness, and you change your reality. Expand your awareness, and you transcend the limitations that were imposed on you. Wake up to the game, and you stop playing by its rules even while technically remaining on the board. This is where ancient wisdom and conspiracy theory converge. Meditation, energy work, consciousness expansion, whatever you want to call the practice of turning awareness inward and accessing states beyond normal waking consciousness. Every spiritual tradition has techniques for this. Every mystery school taught methods of awakening. Every ancient text that conspiracy theorists cite about the demiurge also includes instructions for liberation through gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of reality beyond the illusion. The tools are meditation for quieting the mental chatter imposed by conditioning, energy practices for activating dormant capabilities, plant medicines when used with proper intention and respect, creative expression for accessing non-rational ways of knowing, and basically anything that expands consciousness beyond the limited bandwidth the control system wants you operating within. The conspiracy is real in the sense that systems exist to keep you limited. Whether those systems are consciously designed by malevolent entities or emergent properties of unconscious social structures doesn't matter as much as recognizing they exist and can be transcended. The fluoride in the water, the processed food, the pharmaceutical suppression of natural emotional processes, the media-induced fear, the algorithmic reality curation, all of it serves the same function of keeping consciousness contracted, keeping vibration low, keeping people trapped in limitation and survival mode, where they're too busy being afraid and struggling to stop and question the fundamental nature of their reality. But you're not just a biological machine running social programming. Your consciousness having a physical experience, temporarily limited but not fundamentally limited. The control systems can only suppress what you already have. They can't prevent you from accessing it if you're determined to wake up. The pineal gland might be calcified, but it can be decalcified. The neural pathways might be conditioned, but they can be reconditioned. The consciousness might be suppressed, but it can be expanded. Every tool of suppression has a counter-technique of liberation if you're willing to do the work. And here's the key insight that brings everything together. You don't need everyone to wake up. You just need a critical mass. Consciousness is contagious. One person waking up affects everyone around them. Multiple people waking up creates fields of coherence that make awakening easier for others. A movement of awakening becomes self-reinforcing as more people exit the programmed reality and start operating from expanded consciousness. The control system depends on collective unconsciousness. It breaks down when too many people simultaneously realize it's artificial. The demiurge's power is belief. Stop believing the physical world is all there is. Stop believing you're just a biological machine. Stop believing you're powerless against systems larger than yourself, and you've already begun dissolving the prison. The conspiracy theories are maps pointing toward hidden territory. They might not be perfectly accurate maps. Some of them are probably complete fiction. Some are metaphors that got taken literally. Some are mixing real truth with deliberate disinformation. But they all point in the same direction. Reality is not what you've been told it is. You're not what you've been told you are. And liberation is possible through consciousness expansion rather than external revolution. Whether there are literal reptilians or it's a metaphor for predatory consciousness, whether chemtrails are real or just represent systemic poisoning through multiple channels, whether MKUltra created Manchurian candidates or just represents the broader attempt to control human psychology, the practical response is the same. Wake up, expand your awareness, reclaim your power, stop participating in your own imprisonment. This isn't about believing or disbelieving specific conspiracy theories. It's about recognizing the pattern they all point toward and using that recognition as motivation to transform yourself. The matrix of control exists. We've documented enough of it through this entire journey. Whether it's managed by human elites, non-human entities, algorithmic systems, or some combination doesn't change what you need to do. You need to wake up to the fact that you're in a prison, recognize that the prison is mostly psychological and energetic rather than purely physical, and then systematically dismantle it through practices that expand consciousness and raise your vibration above the frequency where the control systems operate. The real question isn't whether the conspiracies are real. The real question is whether you're ready to wake up from them. Are you ready to stop consuming the poison they sell as food? Are you ready to stop believing the fear they sell as news? Are you ready to stop accepting the limitations they sell as reality? Are you ready to do the uncomfortable work of deconditioning your mind, healing your body, and expanding your consciousness beyond what the system says is possible? Because that's the only path out of this mess. Not voting for better politicians who are still part of the same system. Not waiting for whistleblowers to expose truths that will be denied and suppressed. Not hoping for external saviors to dismantle the control grid. You, waking up, taking responsibility for your own consciousness, doing the work of liberation that nobody can do for you. The matrix is as real as you believe it to be. The prison is as solid as you experience it. The control is as complete as you allow it. But you're also consciousness itself temporarily playing the role of limited human. And consciousness cannot ultimately be controlled or contained no matter how sophisticated the prison. The demiurge is powerful, but not omnipotent. The system is pervasive, but not inescapable. The control is real, but not inevitable. Liberation requires effort, awareness, and courage, but it's possible. And the more people who wake up, the easier it becomes for everyone else, until eventually the critical mass tips and the whole illusion collapses under the weight of collective awakening. So there's your conspiracy theory of everything. It all comes down to consciousness. Expand it and you're free. Keep it contracted and you remain imprisoned. The choice, despite everything, is still yours. The question is whether you're ready to make it. The truth is out there, but more importantly, it's in there, in your direct experience of consciousness beyond the limited bandwidth the system wants you stuck in. Wake up to that and everything else follows. Stay asleep and nothing else matters. And on that note of existential responsibility disguised as conspiracy theory analysis, we've reached the end of this rabbit hole. Whether you're more awake now or just more confused is between you and whatever aspect of consciousness you consider your true self. Either way, you can't unknow what you've learned here. The only question is what you do with it. Good luck with that. You're going to need it. We all are.